Expectations. Keep in mind, Chris Middleton has been out. The Bucks have lost by 2 last night without Giannis on the court, despite Dame's 36-point performance. Milwaukee is now 1-6 on the season, tied for their worst start through 7 games.
Should Doc be more worried about the Bucks, and is just making the playoffs good enough for this squad?
I mean, the way it's looking, yeah, making the playoffs would be good enough. The way it's looking right now for us.
Making the playoffs would be good enough to secure a Nobu dinner.
Huh?
Bar low.
Yeah.
Welcome. Hi, everybody. This is Japping with Tony, talking to Tony, whatever you want to call it. But I am here. I am not alone. I'm here with my good friend, Reed. He is a Bucks fan, a Milwaukee Bucks fan. He also has a dope blog. He and I are going to debate today about the Bucks and about what the Bucks are, what they aren't. But before that, I'm sorry, Reed. How's it going, man? How are you doing?
It's going pretty good. I mean, I'm glad that I can, join you in the yapping session, as everyone that is familiar with me from seeing me on playback knows I can yap as well. So I think someone made a joke on the playback last night. I hope that both of us have enough bandwidth.
Very true, very true. And that is a dope plug. If anybody wants to see more of us yapping or just interact with us, you can do so on playback. We'll be there most of the nights. If not, when the Milwaukee Bucks are playing, probably the Lakers. Again, I am a Laker fan. Reed is a Bucks fan. And our platform is more than just Lakers. It's a little bit of everything. But yeah, that's great to hear, man. One thing I will say is the rules of the game. I'm going to give you 5 minutes. So Reed is going to discuss why the Bucks are in an okay position, even with their rough first 10 games. And I am going to argue why they're doomed. But the floor is yours, Reed. Tell me, why are just tell me why are the Milwaukee Bucks in the weakest conference known to man? Okay, go ahead. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you for letting me start first. First of all, I understand that right now, as of today, when we're recording this, the Bucks do have a record of 3 wins and 8 losses. Now, overall, 4 of those losses have come to the Cavaliers and the Celtics. The Cavaliers have still yet to lose a game, and the Cavaliers won the 2 games that we lost by a combined 3 points. So the fact that it took a Donovan Mitchell buzzer beater in order for us to go from, and we could have been 4-7, and it took literally, like, if we had made a 3 to be 5-6. But it's not just what the games we've already played, it's the games that we're going to play, because we are in the Eastern Conference, as you have talked about. So our next couple games are like the Pistons, the Hornets, the Rockets, the Bulls, the Wizards even, the Heat, who don't look as great, the Hawks, who are missing Trae Young but do have, some good players. And just in general, the fact is the East is weak. It's a weaker conference. There's no denying that. The Bucks are 3-8, and they're only 2.5 games back from being the 3rd seed. That's how bad the East currently is this year. And you look at the Knicks, and you look at the Magic, and you look at some other teams, and they are dealing with injuries. But on the Bucks side, they are only going to get healthier. Damian Lillard missed last night, which ended up being a win with concussion protocol. Chris Middleton is currently missing time. So you say, well, Chris Middleton is a playoff riser. He can kind of help mediate Giannis and Dame's job and so on and so forth. But it's not just of who we're missing. It's the guys that we are not going to play less. So, like, you look, for example, the 3 main people I want to talk about are Gary Trent Jr., Pat Connaughton, and DeLon Wright. Pat Connaughton has been a long mainstay for the Milwaukee Bucks, but this year is only averaging 4.4 points in 16.7 minutes, and he's taking over 7 field goal attempts per game. He's shooting 34% from the field and 26% from 3. Now, the biggest thing, too, is DeLon Wright and Gary Trent Jr., two of the biggest offseason acquisitions the Milwaukee Bucks had, are also shooting worse than Pat Connaughton. Gary Trent Jr. currently is shooting 29% from the field and 23% from 3, yet is still taking over 7.5 attempts from the field and over 4.5 attempts from 3 in the minutes that he's playing. So he's also averaging 24.5 minutes per game. So when you have a guy out there that is basically a negative on offense, who is basically putting up like Ben Simmons shooting numbers and everything, and as well as you're missing a really good offensive player in Chris Middleton, it's kind of showing. Now, we are playing some of our younger guys like an Andre Jackson Jr., like a Ryan Rollins, who are more like 3-and-D type guys. They're mainly just defenders that are good athletes. And then AJ Green isn't as good of a defender, but he's also averaging 8.3 points right now on 52% from 3. AJ Green has yet to take a 2-point attempt this season. You want to talk about pure analytics? All his points have come from 3-pointers and the occasional getting fouled on a free throw. So my biggest thing of why the Bucks are not done is because Chris Middleton is coming back. They're in the Eastern Conference, so there's a ton of games that they're going to play that they can win, and then it's just playing the guys that are playing poorly less, because you have younger guys in, not just in the wings, like the actual wing position, but the term in the wings that they can play. And because of that, those guys become more expendable, that you can trade a Pat Connaughton, a Gary Trent Jr., a DeLon Wright, or even getting into a Brook Lopez, Bobby Portis trade and make this team overall better.
Okay. I see. Well, here's the counter argument. And let me just start saying, yes, you are in the weakest conference. That is a plus for you. However, you have way too many players right now, in my opinion. And basically, I'm not even talking about your biggest issue right now is not a Gary Trent Jr., it's not a Taurean Prince, it's not a Pat Connaughton, it's not even a Brook Lopez. His name is Damian Lillard. And we saw it against Boston. We saw how Dame was put on the spot. They were putting him on action every single time they had. Now, could you hide Dame? Could you do certain stuff? I agree. There's a lot of things you can do to mitigate that. And a Chris Middleton coming back would help. But the biggest issue that you have right now is that Dame cannot guard a parked car. He cannot guard absolute shite. But it gets worse, because here's the problem. His offense isn't carrying how it's supposed to. How many times, and again, I think we discussed this, out of 10 games, 3 or 4 of them have been horrible Dame games? And it's like, he is literally your 1B. If the offense is not running through Giannis, it's definitely running through Dame. And he's getting exposed. So to a certain point, you can kind of play the young guys, which again, that's great that you have young legs. It shows in the metrics right now. Gary Trent Jr. is probably your even with the advanced stats or whatever you want to call it, his net rating right now is the second worst next to Chris Livingston. He only played 1 game. And I think that was like garbage time, if I'm not mistaken. So I'm just saying, like, you have Bobby Portis, you have Gary Trent Jr., you have Torian Prince, you got DeLon Wright, and you got Damian Lillard. That's your bottom net negative players. That when you play them, you lose points more than anything else. So that is a monumental problem, even in the weak East. So I actually have more time to discuss, but I want to hear your response, Reed. So what's your response to that?
I definitely agree that Damian Lillard has never had a reputation of a good defender, and then you factor in that he is now in his age 34 season, and definitely appears to be a step slower. I will say that in the Boston game, the reason he missed last night's game against the Raptors, it came out that he did get a concussion during the Boston game and played through it because they didn't think it was a concussion until he showed concussion-like symptoms later on after the game. So I will say that that's not really a free pass, but like it kind of makes sense when, yes, he was shooting poorly, but it's more so like Dame has shot poorly before, not just this season, but in his career. But it's more so the way that he was missing shots, that he did look a little more deer in headlights, not even trying to make it a Bucks joke, deer in headlights on defense or on offense in general, more than usual, because it's like, well, it came out and it's like, hey, kind of makes sense. That dude had a concussion. But even then, like that Boston game was still inexcusable for even before it. I think that he hit his head in like the halfway through the second quarter. He finished the game 4 of 15. By that point, he was already like 1 for 6, 1 for 7. So he was already shooting poorly and being exposed for being a poor defender before getting a concussion. The concussion just made it a lot easier for him to get exposed on defense and everything. But I mean, you said it best. Like, you know, he's played 10 games. He's had one abysmal game against the Grizzlies. He's had a decent game against the Nets where, yeah, he went 10 of 11 from the line, but he went 5 of 13. And then the Knicks just kind of was a blowout. You know, he was 6 or 15, 0 for 4. Outside of those 3 games, he's gone over 25 points in every single game, with his highest so far this season being 41.
Okay, so, but okay, here's the other issue that is not being discussed though. Let's say Dame, let's chalk that game up on, it's early in the season. Again, concussion, hope he gets better. The biggest issue that I see right now is for you guys to make a move, you kind of need to sacrifice the core or the championship core, if that makes sense. So,
100% agree.
Yeah, and that's kind of like where I think people kind of get a little squeamish about, like, oh, this is the end of the. And by the way, I'm just gonna end the debate here for a moment, because here's the problem with why this is, like, I wanted to be funny about it, but at the same time, like, once you add a context to certain elements of the Bucks and why they kind of got to where they have, and also like factoring that Dame actually had a concussion, it doesn't feel right to me to kind of like just completely shit on the Bucks. But I will say we can identify that there is a lot of uphill struggles for them, not technically in the conference, but just if the end goal is to be a championship team, they have a long way to go, because that means you would need to. So here's the question, Reed. If you trade, let's say Brook Lopez, because again, you are an over the second apron team, meaning you cannot aggregate players. So if you cannot aggregate players and you can only send Mr. Brook Lopez $23 million. Do you have a substitute for his skill set?
I would say that we don't have a substitute for his skill set, but so far this season, that skill set, outside of like getting blocks, just because he is a smart defender and he is a straight up massive dude. I mean, if you've ever been to, like, I remember 2 years ago, I went to the Sixers-Bucks game in Philly, and Brook Lopez was the biggest player on the court in a game that had Joel Embiid and Giannis Antetokounmpo. But I think that it's not so much that about Brook Lopez's skill set. It's, can we find a player that can actually, like Brook Lopez's weaknesses, can we find a player with less weaknesses than Brook Lopez has? Because Brook Lopez can only play in drop coverage. He's not great in playing in man. He's not great when you need to play in zone. He's not really great of a transition defender, especially at his current age. But can you find someone that's maybe doesn't get the blocks, or maybe isn't just straight up as good of a interior defender, but is maybe a little more mobile, maybe a little younger, and also considering the fact that he is 36, but he's 7'2" and only averaging about 4 to 5 rebounds per game.
Yeah, that's a concern. That's an issue. That is definitely. But my question is, like, you just listed all the negatives, but the positives is like he's a spacing big. He basically stretches, like, you can run a 5 out pretty easily. You could run a 4 in out.
He is a spacing big, but that spacing has fallen off a cliff this season, considering he's shooting 39% from the field and 26% from 3 on 5.5 attempts from 3 per game.
So is this the age thing, or is this just like, is it just a bad start?
I think it could be definitely a combo, but I think it's also kind of how we've talked about on playback before, of why Taurean Prince is looking good for the Bucks, but he's looked bad for the Lakers. It's what we are needing from Brook Lopez is too much to ask for from him, as opposed to if he's on a different team, they might ask for less so he can excel better in that role.
And that's interesting, because if I'm not mistaken, from watching some of the Bucks, you kind of play a lot of, how can I say this? Like, Brook Lopez, when he's on the floor, allows Giannis to be more of a, I wouldn't like, more mobile, if that makes sense. Like, Giannis can be more.
100%.
He can be more defensively, like on the perimeter and whatnot. Taking his skill set away, and let's say you can flip that for 3 to 2 players that will help you on the perimeter, will help you on certain elements. Because I'm not gonna lie, there ain't no there ain't no like spacing bigs out there available that I can know of. Like, there may be one, and he has a back injury. I highly doubt the Bucks are going to trade for an injured player right now, which would be Kelly Olynyk. But just saying, if that's the case, would you see them making a philosophy change completely and making Giannis like the centerpiece in terms of as a center for the season?
I could definitely see a philosophy change come. Maybe it's kind of similar to how some teams do, where we still have a starting center, but the majority of Giannis's minutes come at center. So, like, oh, we're getting this guy to start at center, and then 5 minutes into the game, someone else is coming, and then this guy basically just plays when, Giannis needs a break. In terms of a philosophy change, like you said, getting 2 to 3 guys that are like perimeter oriented for a Brook Lopez, I could definitely see that coming, whether or not that they're a good perimeter defender and just kind of have at any point you're playing good perimeter defenders to kind of like hide Dame's deficiencies, and you're letting Giannis just kind of like roam around and play free safety, whether it's guarding the paint or helping, jump out towards 3-point land on the perimeter or anything. Or if it's not a mobile perimeter defender, if like not even talking about centers right now, it could be someone that's like a really good self-creator on offense, that's not relying on catch and shoot, that's not relying on, hey, I can't get a bucket on my own without it getting set up for myself. Like one player that I would really like to see, and obviously it would have to be another player involved from this team, but I would really like to see Jordan Clarkson in a Milwaukee Bucks uniform, because he's kind of like an odd man out in Utah in terms of where they're going with their young guys that they want to play in similar positions. And he is a microwave scorer that if Dame is hurt, like last night, our offense kind of looked cratered without Dame, because outside of Giannis, we didn't really have a perimeter, and especially with no Middleton, we didn't have a perimeter-oriented shot creator. But Clarkson can also be that instant offense that, oh, Giannis and Chris are on the court, Dame needs a breather, here comes Clarkson, our offense doesn't look that much different. Or we have Dame and Clarkson in, everyone is worried about where it's going to be coming from 3-point land and all the self-isolation in offense.
So basically you would lean into the offense, not necessarily the defense at that point. Like if we're being, because like, and I feel like that should be the trend, because like I don't necessarily think you can, how can I say this, to compete at a high level, and because that's the other part, like what's available out there right now is not necessarily the ideal setup for you guys. And maybe there could be a trade that makes that happen, where it's like it's more than one trade. It's sending out maybe a combination of and not a combination because you can't combine, but let's say one trade where you send out Brook Lopez, another one where you send out Bobby, or maybe you send out Pat Connaughton for some other, like, probably if you go that, but then you're gutting up what made you probably champion back then, and now you're back to basically, like, if I'm not mistaken, and maybe, and I think Windhorse said this, Windhorse, or I don't know who, said that there's like 3 players, which would be Dame, Chris Middleton, and Giannis, and everybody else seems to be like on the block, or like most likely that's where the change is going to happen, is like the exterior, which is crazy to say, because honestly I feel you don't have a terrible team. I just feel like if you go the Jordan Clarkson route, how does that look? Like, is it Jordan Clarkson, Dame Lillard, and so Jordan Clarkson, Dame, Middleton, Giannis?
Yeah, so like, I mean, I definitely think that it's those 3 guys that are untouchable.
Yeah.
And like the 3 young guys that are playing heavy minutes for us are kind of like, hey, we would like to keep them, but if it can help us get maybe an extra good player or everything. And I don't even know if it's like, Clarkson's going to make us worse or this or that, but it's kind of like I said that, sometimes we might need a philosophy change, and we might be asking too much from Bobby Portis or too much from Brooke or Pat Connaughton, or if they go to another team, they can excel in their roles because they're being asked a little, less from. Just in general, it's kind of like, hey, right now we're asking Brook Lopez to be a starting pitcher to go and get us 7 innings, and he can't really get us 7 innings anymore. But if another team says, we're going to use you as a relief pitcher, you're going to do 3 to 4 innings, he's going to look a lot better. Because for us, he can still get those 3 to 4 good innings, but it's the fact that we're asking for those 2 to 3 extra innings from him out of a necessity. So I think that sometimes, even if it's for what's considered a less talented player on paper, sometimes it takes addition by subtraction, considering that we really only played 6 to 7 guys in our 2021 playoff rotation, in the finals and just leading entirely up to that. And 5 of those guys are still getting serious minutes for the Milwaukee Bucks. The finals this coming season is going to be the 2025 finals. And we are talking about 5 players that played heavy minutes in the 2021 finals. So it's kind of like it's time for a change of scenery. It's time for looking for a new identity. It's time for just overall, we are not the team that we were in the past, and we can't run these same guys out and expect results that we were getting 3 to 4 years ago.
Yeah. And that's kind of like the change. That's where the hard pill to swallow kind of moment kind of has to be, because like when you traded for Dame, when you traded for like, it basically shifted the entire philosophy of the team, in my opinion. Now it's like, now you still are not a complete team in terms of like, just swap Dame for Drew and call it a day. Now it's Dame plus defenders plus
exactly
youth plus everybody else that needs to be acquired to kind of like shape a championship team. But that I think it's a rough start for the Bucks. It's not ideal, but I don't think it's doomsday. But I will say this: the next road trip that you have, if Dame's not available, if there is any injuries that are unforeseen, which I hope not, because the league has been riddled by injuries way too much now. Like, it's kind of crazy. But if that could be limited and you guys can stay relatively healthy, the East being what they are, it gives you a shot to see what shakes up at the trade deadline, because maybe there's a Charlotte that kind of drops down. Maybe there's a team with high hopes and with decent players that maybe drop down. Like, to a certain point, you never know. $23 million in expiring, kind of like the same thing with how the Lakers operated with when they did the Westbrook trade. Westbrook is so bad. Westbrook is so awful. You have to put a lot of picks to him. But the fact is, an expiring talks to people in the trade deadline. And I feel like right now you just, and I said this in playback, sheep plug, playback, PGM fan cave, you can see us. But I talked about this in playback is Bucks only need to tread water for the foreseeable future. Like, if they're like within the top 6 from here to the trade deadline, somewhere hovering like maybe the 5th or 6th seed, or maybe a little bit higher depending on how things shake up, hey, make 1 or 2 trades and you're closer. And that's the thing, like, they may consider this season kind of like a wash, but maybe prepare yourself better for the off season coming up next, and then being like, okay, we're not going to re-sign Brook Lopez, let's trade him. We're not going to re-sign, like, maybe the Bobby Portis experiment is over, let's try to trade him for something different. You know, maybe shed salary in terms of like, hey, once we're not a second apron team, we can probably package a better or build a better team. It's basically, they have to, basically the month of December is going to be very, very crucial for what happens for the Bucks moving forward. So I appreciate you, Reed. Reed, just question, where can people find you?
People can find me mainly on Twitter. My Twitter has obviously like a link tree with everything. My Twitter is going to be @Reed, spelled like my name, Malcolm, like Malcolm in the middle, J, @Reed Malcolm J. If you go there, you'll see me tweet basically just about anything, whether it's basketball, whether it's Bucks, whether it's any other games, whether it's football, you know, this or that. And all my blogs and podcasts and everything are in the link in my bio on my Twitter. If anyone wants to go and check that out, it's much appreciated.
Yeah, that sounds great, and a link will be provided below in the video. By the way, please stay tuned. We got more, we got more content coming to this channel. Thank you all for tuning in. Like, share, and subscribe. And honestly, stay safe out there, and see you on the next one. Peace out.